Wim, do you want to start? Introduction?
Hello, good afternoon. Yes. Good afternoon for everyone. Thank you for coming. I think we need to start now. That the session today is the community connect. Is the floor for community connect. So now it's called it research sharing with community results for NTB trials. I think the fantastic NTB trials. Thank you, Dr. Carol and your team for all your efforts to achieve the new shorter regimens. It's a great thank you for everyone. For decades, research have to sought the surgeon improve treatment regimens for drug-resistant TB. Recent advances have shorter treatment durations from 18 and 24 months to 6 and 9 months, and further optimized regimens by replacing the terrible injections with a new oral treatment. I think it's a great opportunity, the results in TB trials to improve the new regimens for drug-resistant TB. And Dr. Carlos, over to you. Is your, I think, oh, Sandeep? Yeah, okay. So sorry.
So hello everyone, we are discussing here NTB clinical trial results in the Community Connect section. To start with, if we look at the background and if we go back in 2015, there were around 500,000 cases of MDR-TB in a year and around 190,000 deaths per year. So it was a huge burden. And if we reflect on the treatment that was available, it was around 18 to 24 months of treatment, which was a long treatment, was a complex treatment, and it had many more drugs in it. So the payload was huge. At the same time, it was having injectable drugs, which used to continue for 6 to 8 months. And if you look at the safety and efficacy or effectiveness of this regimen, as far as the safety is concerned, there was a constellation of adverse events. And if you look at the efficacy or the success rate, it was around 50 to 60%. So against this backdrop, the NTB trials were undertaken from 12 different sites from 7 countries on the 4 continents. Actually, it allowed substantial heterogeneity in terms of the disease as well as comorbidities and other characteristics of MDR-TB patients. So NTB trial was a randomized, controlled, unblinded trial. We included pulmonary TB patients who were having confirmed rifampicin resistance and fluoroquinolone susceptibility. So we had 5 experimental regimens which were there for 39 weeks. So each regimen contained new as well as repurposed drugs, new drugs like bedaquiline and delamine, and repurposed drugs like linezolid and clofazimine. So each regimen had either bedaquiline or delamine or both. Then the fluoroquinolone, either leoflox or moxiflox, then parazinamide, and then the varied use of linezolid and clofazimine, which were the repurposed drugs. and each regimen was not having not more than two potent QT prolongers. So we tried to compare each experimental regimen to the control at 73rd week, which was almost 17 months after the enrollment. So actually it allowed us to detect relapse cases after these shorter regimens. The control arm that was used, that was the WHO standard of care, and it got adopted over time and time. It used the current guidelines. So even the control arm had new and the repurposed drugs like bedaquiline, delaminate, linezolid, and clofazimine. You can see the distribution of participants in all the arms. It was almost similar in all the arms. So total of 754 participants were enrolled. If you look at the selected baseline characteristics, you can see that 50% of the participants had pyrazinamide resistance and 14% of them were HIV positive. 15% of them had diabetes and almost 6% of them had active viral hepatitis. And if you look at the extent of the disease, 80% of them had sputum smear positive results and almost 60% of them had cavitation. So these participants were well in the advanced stage of the disease. So these are the efficacy results of endTB regimens at week 73. So before we try to see these results, we should always understand, we should always remember that we had considered 12% of non-inferiority margin while comparing experimental regimen with that of the control regimen. So we'll start with the control arms. You can see that control arm has also performed very well, almost 81% of the success rate. And then if you look at the experimental regimens, endTB1, endTB2, and endTB3, these three experimental regimens were nearly good as that of the control arm. I mean, they were not inferior when compared with the control arm. In fact, NTB2, you can see it has shown the superior results. It has shown the better results as compared to that of the control arm. So NTB1 had bedaquiline, linezolid, moxifloxacin, and pyrazinamide. NTB2 had bedaquiline, linezolid, leoflox, clofazimine, and pyrazinamide. NTB3 had bedaquiline, delaminate, linezolid, leofloxacin, and pyrazinamide. The NTB5 regimen, which was having delaminate, moxifloxacin, clofazimine, and pyrazinamide, it was also not inferior in some of the analysis, but not all. However, NTB4 regimen, which was having delaminate, leofloxacin, linezolid, clofazimine, and pyrazinamide, it was not as good as that of the control arm as far as the efficacy is concerned. So these were in crux the efficacy results. If we look at the safety profile, we had a vigorous and rigorous safety surveillance. At each visit or at each contact, we had recorded and reported any event which was either related or unrelated to the investigational drugs. So almost in every arm, more than 50% of the 50% of the participants, uh, the drug was stopped permanently due to adverse event. It was more common in control arm and it was but obvious. It was not surprising because it was an individualized regime and there were the drug stoppages in the control regimens. If we look at the adverse event of special interest, these are the adverse events which are known adverse events of the drug due to the drugs, the experimental regimens like blood disorders, then peripheral neuropathy, optic neuropathy, then QT prolongation on electrocardiogram, and the hepatotoxicity. If we look at the blood disorders, it is evenly distributed across all the arms and it is most often due to linezolid and because linezolid was a part of all the experimental regimens except NTB5 and even in control arm 72% of the participants had linezolid in their regimen. As far as peripheral neuropathy, which was like tingling and numbness and pain in the peripheral extremity, it was also seen in all the arms, but it was in a lesser proportion to the tune of 2 to 6%. Optic neuropathy was seen only in 4 patients, one in NTB2 and one in NTB4 and two in control arm. the QT prolongation, which is like a precursor for sudden cardiac arrhythmias or sudden deaths, it was also not common. It was only seen in 10 patients, 4 patients in NTP2 and 6 patients in NTP5. As far as liver toxicity is concerned, we'll see the next slide. So the hepatotoxicity was much more compared to other adverse event of special interest. It was at the tune of from 6% to 18%, and it was seen in all the arms. It was much more common in the experimental regimens compared to the control arm. But as you know, the hepatotoxicity, many of the drugs like bedaquiline, then moxifloxacin, linezolid, pyrazinamide, all these drugs are hepatotoxic. So it is not unique for the NTB regimens, and it is very important to have this screening of abnormality in liver functions for any MDR-TP regimen. It is not unique to NTB regimens or not unique to pyrazinamide. So to conclude, we had 3 9 months regimens, NTB1, I repeat NTB1, NTB2 and NTB3. They are almost as good as current well-performing 18-month standard of care. In fact, one of them, like NTB2, was better than the standard of care. So NTB trials has given more options, has opened more options for the patient-centric care of MDR-TB. It has achieved more because we could get 3 regimens which were non-inferior in one shot or in one go. If you look at the mortality was much low in the NTB trials. There were very few deaths. And it does indicate that if we have the proper supervision and timely care, we can do better even with the shorter regimens and even with the longer regimens. The NTB trial showed good results in people with severe disease, comorbidities. As I said earlier, that there was a substantial heterogeneity and in terms of disease and comorbidities. I think these regimens can do well in patients having severe disease as well as comorbidities like HIV, then diabetes, and viral hepatitis. As far as the safety profile, even the safety profile was encouraging. There were similar rates of important AEs except liver toxicity. But as I said, most of the TB drugs are hepatotoxic and we have to screen. I mean, it is not unique for the NTB trial regimens. It is common with all the regimens. NTB5, this could be an alternative, first alternative, shorten or oral alternative for patients who are unable to take linezolid and bedaquiline. As you know, most of the guidelines now suggest bedaquiline. But those patients who are unable to take linezolid or bedaquiline, this could be one of the good option. All the 4 regimens from the NTB trial can be used, of course, in adults and adolescents, but even in children, pregnant people, because all the drugs now, these drugs are having pediatric formulations. And it is a major gain for the NTB trials that these regimens can be used for this group of patients, in which generally we prefer longer regimens or the modified Bangladesh regimens. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandeep, wherever you are. My name is Wim van der Velde. I'm co-chairing with Jimmy from GNP Plus in Cape Town. Our next speaker will be Carol Mitnick, who is a co-principal investigator of the NTB and NTBQ trials. And she is at Partners in Health, the Director of Research for the NTB project. Carol, you're going to talk to us about how these results will influence, hopefully, the policy landscape and the research landscape.
I will. Thanks, Wim.
I just wanted to say that if people have questions, you can keep them either for the question and answer session at the end, or you can do the Slido thing. There you just scan it and it will pop up. Thanks.
And also, if people are looking for seats, there are seats, so feel free to move up if you'd like. So thanks so much to everyone for coming tonight, and to Lindsay and Jimmy and Wim and others for organizing the session. It's a great opportunity to be able to really dig into the results a little bit and discuss them with you all. So I'm going to be quite brief in my presentation, hoping to leave more time for discussion. And as Wim said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we might move forward in future research and policy for the treatment of drug-resistant TB. So on the policy front first, so this schema just kind of shows the flow of developing evidence and reviewing evidence, and then converting that into guidelines in the WHO framework. So that was, the guidelines were last revised in a process that kind of spanned 2021 and 2022 when the new guidelines for the treatment of drug-resistant TB were released. The WHO is planning another guideline revision in 2024, possibly with data from the endTB trial, data from the Beat South Africa trial, and the WHO Euro cohort, all on the treatment of rifampin-resistant TB. And one of the things that we see in this fairly long, complex process is that it's hard for the WHO guidelines to incorporate new information as it emerges. But thankfully, new evidence and new alternatives are emerging much more quickly than ever before. So this is clearly a space where there's room for improvement to be able to do this more quickly. So this figure just gives you a sense of the WHO guidelines for, let's see if I can never make these pointers work. Okay, but I can advance the slide with it. Okay, so the current treatment options, the first column is for adults, the second column is for kids, the third column is for use during pregnancy, and the fourth column is for people who are not able to take bedaquiline and linezolid. And you can see that in the current treatment guidelines, the BPALM regimen is only recommended for that first group, so non-pregnant adults, while the modified 7-drug, 9 to 11-month, fairly toxic Bangladesh regimens are recommended for adults, for children, and even one of them is recommended for people during pregnancy. I apologize for that mistake. The long individualized regimen, thankfully without injectables, is currently recommended for all of those groups. And what we imagine could happen with the consideration of the endTB regimens for use is that for adults, you could conceivably have the BPALM regimen as well as all three endTB regimens, I'm completely drawing a blank, sorry, 1, 2, and 3 for non-pregnant adults. And then the long individualized regimens could also be used kind of generally in that population. For young children who can't receive the BPALM regimen, all of the drugs in the endTB regimens have pediatric formulations and are recommended for use in children by WHO. So there would be no exclusion for young children for these endTB regimens. And the long individualized regimen would still be an option but for a very, very small fraction of people who for some reason can't receive any of these alternatives. In pregnancy, now there would be the option of the endTB regimens, the 3 endTB regimens that all use drugs that are considered acceptable during pregnancy. Again, that would be a change from the current situation. And then again, the long individualized regimens remain an option, not one that many will choose, but an option if necessary. And then lastly, just to note for people whose for people who can't take bedaquiline and linezolid for any reason, the endTB regimen finds, so the bedaquiline and linezolid sparing regimen could be an alternative for those people, as is the longer regimen. So we could conceivably see a real change in the landscape for MDR treatment depending on what the guidelines committee decides once reviewed. For research implications, I just had a few thoughts, and I'd really love to hear what others think. This is a very research-savvy group in front of me, and so I'd love to hear what other people think might be future research implications as well. So the first comment I would make is this is, as to our knowledge, this is the first use of a Bayesian adaptive randomization strategy for a TB trial. This is a methodology that's been used for HIV trials, and where you have the ability to evaluate multiple regimens at a time, and conceivably even to develop a platform trial like people are already discussing with Paradigm TB, where you can bring in new regimens and replace the standard of care over time. And we think that it was a viable strategy. We were able to do this in the 7 countries. So another research implication is to think about a comparison between the BPALM regimen and the non-inferior endTB regimens. And I'm not necessarily talking about another randomized controlled trial. I'm not sure that would be the best use of resources, but we're looking into whether there are ways to use the existing data to make a valid comparison, and then to have that information to feed into clinical decision making, so comparison of safety and efficacy conceivably. I think there's a lot of room for research in optimizing the monitoring strategies. So in the trials, we do a lot of really close monitoring, like every week for the first 12 weeks, and then about monthly for the remainder of the first year, and then every 6 to 8 weeks for the second year. That is a lot for programs to do. We realize that, and it's probably not necessary. In fact, I know it's not necessary, but we don't know what is the optimal monitoring frequency and whether we can identify certain risk groups, for example, who might be at higher risk of QT prolongation, and they could be identified in the first month or so of treatment, and only that group might need a more intensive screening for QT prolongation. Similar for the hepatotoxicity that we saw as a relatively common adverse event here. If we can identify risk groups, we might be able to target the monitoring to make sure that these regimens can be used more safely for everyone. Mentioning the PZA, there is a question. Obviously, we know that PZA was discontinued in between 15 and 20% of the patients in the experimental arms. And so there could be some questions to answer about how do we optimize the duration of PZA so you can get the benefit of shortening that we've seen, that we saw with the treatment for drug-susceptible TB, and possibly if there is truly a synergy in humans between bedaquiline and PZA to get that benefit for the bedaquiline-containing regimens. I think there is also potential for further shortening. We've seen from the BPAL-M regimen that 6 months seems to be enough for most people. So there may be opportunities to shorten these regimens further, and particularly in children or people who have other people who have limited disease. A single daily dosing strategy right now, delaminid is dosed twice a day. And knowing that some of the new trials are examining a higher single dose of delaminid, so it's once a day currently it's twice a day, 100 milligrams at each dosing, but there are trials using 300 milligrams once a day. That could provide a simplification for the dosing of the delaminid-containing regimens. And then we have this really interesting finding about endTB5, the bedaquiline and linazolid sparing regimen, so perhaps doing a little bit more research in populations that can't receive these regimens to understand really how they can can't receive that regimen, understand how they could benefit from this alternative. I believe, so I would love to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, I just want to extend my thanks. Jimmy thanked the endTB team. Jimmy didn't mention that he was a member of the endTB team. He was a critical part of the team in Peru for regulatory and many, many other matters in Peru. And so many people here in this room tonight have contributed in one way or another as members of the Scientific Advisory Committee or the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, or just moral support or intellectual contributions. But you can see the full list of teams here, of partner organizations. Unitaid being our generous and long-term funder in this has been a huge, huge boon. And here's a picture of the incredible endTB teams around the world. So thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, the next speaker is Dr. Christopher Perrin. Dr. Christopher Perrin is a French pharmacy with Master of Science in Public Health. She has worked in clinical research for more than 10 years. Before working for several humanitarian organizations, since 2005, she has focused on a challenge that affects the supply of qualified assurance medicines on limited resource countries, as well as access to affordable treatment and innovation for infectious disease and non-communicable ones. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for coming, and over to you.
Thanks, Jimmy, and hi, everyone. Should I do anything with the... Sorry. So, hi, everyone. So here I'm here to provide a contribution on the access landscape for the medicine that made up actually the endTB regimen and the supporting diagnostics. So here I tried to summarize the estimate for the regimen cost for the 5 endTB regimens, but also having in mind all the existing recommended regimen by WHO. Actually, you might see that the figures here for the endTB regimen differ slightly from what has been presented on Wednesday, because actually on the GDF catalog in October, some price went down. So it's a good news. Actually, endTB regimen are costing less compared to what you saw on Wednesday. Just to say, so when you look in pale blue, Bipalem, which is recommended by WHO, together with an example of a 9-month regimen, you have Bipalem costing less than $500. Nowadays, the 9-month regimen less than $300, and still a 20-month regimen combining bedaquiline delamanid costing more than $5,000. So here we've got, let's say, a remnants from the past with regimen costing several $1,000s, and already regimen that have become so much more affordable. And when looking at the endTB regimens that can be used under a personal research right away now, you can see that the endTB1 and endTB2 are very much in line with the cost of the Bipalem or 9-month regimen. And then whenever delamanid is being included, of course, we are coming up around $2,000. Then, of course, it's a bit of an issue now, but looking ahead to the potential regimen costs, once optimal generic competition will occur, those regimen costs have been based on cost-based generic prices, and it comes from a publication that came out in 2017, where researchers estimated, based on the cost of API, cost of manufacturing, a series of regular costs that manufacturers need to manage, plus a 10% return on investment. They estimated the cost of all the existing TB medicine, including the new ones, bedaquiline, delamanid, pretomanid. So those regimen costs are estimated based on those elements, and you see that as soon as delamanid is reaching its target generic price, those regimens will be completely in line with other regimens of interest today, so affordability could be around the corner. And actually, at the moment, delamanid is mainly supplied by Otsuka, the innovator company, and Viatris, and the two companies have separate markets, so they are not competing between each other, and are farmed the same for the Russian Federation. And there, you have the cost-based generic price for delamanid between $5 to $16, and you see that it's 2 days. The price of delamanid from Otsuka and Viatris is 12 times higher. So there's definitely a real margin of progress in terms of reaching affordability target for this medicine. And actually, that should be something that we could see in the coming months, because the primary patent held by Otsuka and delamanid expired in October. So, as you know, the monopoly is over for that company, and generic competition could start by Q3 next year, with at least one generic Indian manufacturer, which is already developing delamanid, and there are in the room a representative of another Indian manufacturers who could be interested to develop it. So generic competition could start, let's say, by Q3 next year, with quality assured version of generic delamanid. And in the meantime, at least the good news is we are hoping early next year for Viatris to start supplying what we call 100% in-house delamanid tablets, where it will be their own API manufactured in India and their own tablets manufactured in India, when Viatris today is supplying delamanid tablets based on Otsuka's API. Then we don't need only drugs to implement endTB regimen, of course, as any DRTB regimen, but also access to diagnostics. And of course, what matters is access to fluoroquinolone-resistant testing. And you all know that, unfortunately, access to Genex plus XDR cartridges is prohibited by its high prices today. And many facilities therefore rely on sending samples to faraway reference labs for LPA or culture for fluoroquinolone-resistant testing. And for the endTB regimens, actually, well, that's, and the use of XDR cartridges, the same rules are actually applying to endTB regimen as for all oral 9 months regimen. And there is a need to exclude fluoroquinolone resistance. You see, levofloxacin was a common medicine in most endTB regimen. And then you know that this exclusion is of, and the test is unfortunately often is either not done or done later. The risk of starting patients on a non-effective regimen, if, for instance, someone resistant to fluoroquinolone, we would lose, of course, for that patient, the added value of the fluoroquinolone combination or addition if this resistance is not averted. So without the XDR cartridges, countries can definitely roll out endTB regimen, but those issues in terms of access to adequate diagnostic tool for those patients is absolutely mandatory. And you all know now, I'm sure, the Time for 5 campaign, and this graph where there's the target price of $5 has been set by let's say, a research done by MSF with other allies, and you see that there's still a real margin for the price of the TB cartridges and XDR TB cartridges from Cepheid to move ahead towards the $5. That would be a reasonable price to be set for that. So thank you so much, and I will finish there.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Our next speaker is Annie, my colleague at the Global TB CAP, Annie Hernasari. She's a TB advocate. She also leads Rekat Peduli Indonesia, which is a MDR TB survivor organization. So you're a member, as I said, from the Global TB CAP and also the Global Fund Advocates Network. You have the floor, Annie. Do you need a presentation? Oh, all right, okay. Oh, that's right, it's the response, yes.
I just respond.
You do very well.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I respond to Dr. Carol. I saw that one of your slides is about PCA. You say that optimized duration, refine understand of PCN bedaquiline synergy. So my comment is about how safety and tolerability about endTB regimen. So especially in relation to inclusion of pyrazinamide and the question about opportunities to iterate on the inclusion and duration of pyrazinamide to optimize the tolerability. I'm sorry, my English is. Yeah, and the second is I just want to comment on how inclusive the study was for PH-LIV for the people with TB with comorbidities, so like people living with HIV, diabetes, hepatitis, and people who use drug and alcohol and etc. The question about any important exclusion plans to do like subgroup analysis and follow on studies, additional work to be done. That's for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next respondent, community respondent, is Diptendu Bhattacharya. Is coming from India. He's a fellow with the Survivors Against TB in India. He is a biotechnologist and also a DRTB survivor. Diptendu, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So thank you, great presentation from all of you three, and I am getting chance to interact with you two directly. So my question is related to this one, is that when we are talking about a landscape of 6 months regime, how the 6 months regime is compared to with this 9-month regime in direct confrontation, like not exactly confrontation, but is comparison. In comparison, in the sense of drug safety, price recommendations, and if there is any plan to do any parallel studies between these two analyses, that how this can be a thing, and we also seeing that your presentation is showing that the current guideline is working good for the adults. So if there is a scope of NTB trial is getting a claim, and that is into the vulnerable communities, that means the pregnant, the children, and those people who are resistant to specific kind of second line of drugs. So is that going to limit the scope of this particular regime, and that will ultimately can it anyway can it hit on the pricing on all the policies simultaneously, and under what circumstances that for adult also this can completely replace the 6 months regime, which are also in the context. Thank you.
Okay, great questions. So on the safety and tolerability of the regimens, first, Ani, and the question specifically about the pyrazinamide duration. So I think from our results, I don't think we can say anything about the optimal duration of pyrazinamide. I think we can say that if people are using any of these regimens, they need to start with pyrazinamide, and there will likely be a relatively low threshold for stopping pyrazinamide in case of toxicity. And that's the best we have for right now. I think we're talking to some colleagues who have been doing in vitro work or animal work with pyrazinamide and bedaquiline to try to understand. It sounds like there is some unpublished work about the synergy that continues to support the idea that there is synergy between these two drugs. Whether that synergy exists in the presence of mutations causing resistance to pyrazinamide, I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that yet. And that was really like the motivation for including pyrazinamide in all the regimens initially, was because of its benefits for shortening, because there's no rapid tests that could be used to diagnose pyrazinamide resistance at baseline. We didn't want people to not receive the benefit of pyrazinamide if we weren't sure if their isolates were resistant. So there's some more work to do to understand that. We have done some subgroup analyses on patients with resistance to pyrazinamide versus patients without resistance to pyrazinamide, and there is a small drop-off in the efficacy of the regimens in the presence of resistance, but not as much as you might expect given the resistance. Other subgroup analyses, so we have done a number of subgroup analyses on some of the very characteristics mentioned, on the presence of HIV, on low BMI, by age, by country, I already mentioned the pyrazinamide resistance, by diabetes as well. And we're only seeing slight drop-offs in the relative benefit of the shortened regimens in two groups. It's not universal. It might not be statistically significant, but in those with the lowest BMI and in those with HIV. There may be some reduced benefit of these shorter regimens, but there's definitely more work to do in that space, and that's not inconsistent with what's been seen in some other places and some other studies. Okay, so the comparison of the sort of the, if you don't mind, I'll kind of combine your question, Diptendu, into kind of what's the place of these 9-month regimens, given that there is this 6-month regimen recommended for adults. So I think for price, Christophe showed, and you can share any comments you might have about whether if there were, say, a limited recommendation, what the impact would be on price. But I think we're already moving toward a very good place on the price of these regimens. 2 of the regimens are already cheaper than BPALM. One of the regimens is already cheaper than the Bangladesh regimen. They're all in approximately the same price range, all of these all-oral shorter regimens, sorry, except for the delaminid containing ones. So I don't think price should be a major issue at this point in choosing among the regimens. The way we look at it is that these results from the endTB trial really offer options. They offer the opportunity for patient-centered care, which is something that has been so sorely lacking from the MDR-TB space, where people are just told, have been told, you have to suffer through these events. It used to be you have to suffer through going deaf because that's better than the alternative. But now we have multiple alternatives, so we don't have to tell people that anymore. And we have alternatives depending on individual preference, depending on drug availability, depending perhaps on comorbidities, and more information that we can learn if we do this comparison. So we are going to try to do the comparison between the BPALM and the endTB regimens, again, using the existing data from the 2 trials. There are some questions that will have to be worked out to determine whether such a comparison can yield valid results, but we think it's really, really important information for communities, for providers to have going forward.
If anyone wants to ask a question around the pricing, but
So I have a follow-up question. Is that if the prices are comparable, then why not to choose the shorter one because I'm getting free of medicine from quicker? Because from my experience, I have taken a 24 months plus 3 months, 27 months of treatment, 3 months of first-line drugs, which didn't work, and then 24 months of second-line drug, which eventually worked within 2 months, and then 22 months of treatment without any significance result of the positiveness in my sputum and the CBNAT. So if that would have been a shorter 6 months regime or 9-month regime that back then, I could have joined my PhD program again. Exactly. Or I joined, but still then I had 13 months of treatment left, so I couldn't keep my body working towards that lab because I am doing a microbiological work. So it was a very risky situation that I am going through, that if I am already infected with one and if I get co-infection, that will be a end of my everything, not only career. So so if that would have been a shorter one, then why to choose? Because we have to and also input that cost of man hours, that if we are going for the longer regime, and that is hindering my daily activity. I know that people can take medicine and work parallelly if they are not contagious anymore, but that might be in some cases that might be problem. And if that specific, you have mentioned this, there are some specific cases where there are options that you have this one and 6 months and 9 months and 9 months and more inclusive. That's a good positive point from this study. So, but the thing is, if that is only serving those people who are under that threat that they can't take 6 months, then the demand will be a lower side. So it will take a longer time to decrease the cost in that levels because. But I hope that since there are some common drugs on all the regimes, so that will eventually come down the drug for that aspect. But I think that 6 months versus 9 months, extra 3 month duration is somewhat needs to be considered in this study also.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and I mean your experience of having to put your life on hold for an extended period is awful, and I hope nobody has to do that again for that long of a period. And I think that many people would choose a 6-month regimen over a 9-month regimen if all else turns out to be equal. But right now we actually don't know. The control arms performed very differently in the two trials. Where in the BPALM trial, the control arm had about a 50% success, where as in the endTB trial, the control arm had about 80% success. We know the BPALM regimen performed really well, so it may be that the difference in the control arm doesn't matter, but that's one of the things that we'll want to look at carefully. And then I would also say that the uptake of the BPALM regimen has been really slow. And right now, all of the drugs involved in endTB, at least endTB 1 and 2, are readily available in pretty much every program around the world. And so if this can be a quicker start to shorter, more tolerable regimens than, say, the Bangladesh regimen and the longer regimen, then that's a really good reason to go ahead and start using them. Not that we shouldn't also be trying to get the 6-month regimens available for all those who would prefer them and who are eligible for them, but we shouldn't be waiting for them to do better, because it looks like we could do better immediately.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. Any questions from the floor? Okay, oh, I have a questions for the NTB trial team. Which are the next steps in terms to share the results with the community, and in terms to make the new policies, right? Because this is the challenge to update the guidelines. Which ones your thoughts about that, and your next steps?
Feels like the Carol show, sorry. I wish I wish Sandeep were here. So, Jimmy, excellent question. So we have started sharing the results with the national TB programs and other stakeholders in the countries where the trials were run. And we're trying to develop specific strategies for sharing with the communities, sharing with the participants themselves, as well as the affected communities and other interested communities in each of the settings. We're working with the civil society organizations in place, the patient groups that exist where there aren't really TB groups. We're working with the HIV patient groups to try to figure out how best to get the message out, considering what forms of, say, local media, social media might be ways to share the results. And we really, really would welcome your suggestions in how to do this. I think my colleague Jackie has spent a lot of this week actually going to the community sessions to try to get a sense of the kind of optimal ways to share information and communicate. So we're very open to ideas. For another trial, the Global TB CAB recommended at least a participant letter. So that's something that we will definitely do in all of the sites, but we'd love more clever ideas. Like, I'm not a content creator, so.
Thanks, Carol. We have 2 questions from the floor. 3?
So actually, it's not a question, it's more a thought for debate. And I feel that this microphone is working. I know that we had a lot of noise problems. Anyway, so we have these regimens. I am biased because I fully believe in these regimens. I'm part of the team, but I'm also an access pushing person. And we have these regimens. We have BPALM. We have several options. And maybe now some political discuss would be, how do we present this? How do we compare practical NTB regimens and this and that? And I really wonder if we need to do that. And also, I will say a statement that might get some. Also, I wonder if we should wait for WHO recommendations to push these regimens. And I will tell you why I say this. It just came to my mind talking with a colleague from the trial just half an hour ago. When I was an infectious disease in intern in Italy, I realized that we did not have official guidelines for everything, and we still don't. And in Europe, we don't. What would we do? We would look for some disease or conditions at the latest evidence, let's say the latest publications, okay? And say, although I don't have a clear guideline in place, I'm going to do the best as per my knowledge and the scientific knowledge to provide right away the best treatment I have to my patient that I have in front of me. So reflecting on the fact that there are always a lot of delay. So this amazing trial, I think it's amazing, took a long time. And now maybe will not be just a presentation in a union conference that unfortunately does not reach all countries. It reaches us, and then the message gets diluted. So we need to wait for these WHO recommendations. Oscar, I look at you. In some cases, do countries really need to wait for this kind of guidance once we have the scientific evidence that we could put in place right away for vulnerable population? Sorry. I'm crazy, huh?
Yeah, perhaps you can take 2 or 3 questions and then answer once this is finished.
Unless you want me to try? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. So, hi, Gustavo Velasquez. I'm biased because I'm part of the NTB team, but have there been, so I think it's safe to say, right, that these regimens will make guidelines. Of course, this is along the lines of what you were saying, Gabriela. The guidelines only go so far. It seems like we are in the age now of preferred and alternative regimens for rifampin-resistant TB, which is great. So I'm just wondering if there's been discussions about going further, because as an ID doctor who works in a TB clinic, you also have to make decisions. So really what I'm asking for is a field guide. Happy to help in that. But it's going a little bit further with the data, right? And to kind of put it out there and perhaps save some people some work. For example, pyrazinamide-containing regimens are probably not liver-sparing regimens, but we have to deal with that when we have patients with co-infections, or at least we could look at the data and say, you know, what happened with Hep B and Hep C, et cetera. What do we do if we have diabetes? If somebody has diabetes, if somebody has baseline peripheral neuropathy, and also to kind of integrate that with BPAL-M. I think a field guide would be really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Gabriela's comment that I actually, as someone who writes like community treatment literacy materials, we just published the Activist Guide to Shorter Regimens. It doesn't yet include NTB, so next year we'll look forward to updating that. But as someone who writes those types of materials and does training, I would find it incredibly helpful to have something like the differential for where these regimens are preferred in what populations, under what conditions and comorbidities. And I also have a follow-up question about if there's any possibility, since MSF was involved in both trials, to do like a discrete choice experiment to understand preferences and try to capture how preferences are articulated considering the differences between the two regimens in terms of their profile and other factors.
Go ahead, Oscar.
Okay. Hi, I'm Oscar. I'm semi-biased, I would say. So I would like to comment on what Gabriela's point, being wearing a WHO hat, but I do not represent the global TB program, I represent the region. So now these regimens, the effect, the outcomes presented, they're great, congratulations. And I'm really, really proud and happy for you. So, but happy for the patients who can benefit from that now. And you were saying that from now, people can benefit from that under the operational research conditions. So I would say from the example from our region that before something is coming out from the WHO as a formal recommendation, which is based on the evidence, so there is a possibility to whatever is different from the standard can be used under modification under the operational research conditions. So for us, for the countries in the WHO European region, word operational research are not an obstacle. And it's not an obstacle because the conditions are so close to the programmatic implementation. And whatever is being implemented in a routine practice, that can be applied to that step. So we are accompanying countries with this going through the process of getting an approvals necessary at the country level. But again, still, this can be considered as an obstacle. But anyway, Carol, maybe you can comment on this of what is now until what is the best way, what is the feasibility for the implementation. But again, we are encouraging countries to generate this even evidence that is coming from the operational research. Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to make sure my colleagues here have an opportunity to respond to the comments about kind of timing and whether regimens should be introduced before perhaps WHO guidelines incorporate them, and then also kind of the point that Gustavo made about having some kind of field guide. Is that something that you would like to be involved in developing, in thinking about how this decision-making process might go for you as patients if you were offered a choice between a 6 and a 9 month regimen that had maybe different benefits and drawbacks?
Yeah, thank you so much. For me, we are from the Global TB CAP. I'm from the TB survivor. So we really, for me, I need to know what kind of medicine or maybe drug that will roll out before the WHO guideline. You know what? Because the WHO guideline is already, before they come out, they are reviewed by civil society task force. So they are one of our colleague also in the TB CAP. So that's why we important to know what is the drug available and already in the trial, so we can give the WHO advice to know what is the better from the community side.
I think you have covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try to just add, make a couple of comments. So, look, I just want to clear up any uncertainty. Countries do not have to do what WHO recommends. They are sovereign nations and they can do what they choose to do. There are other pressures that make them follow WHO guidelines. For example, if Global Fund money depends on using recommended regimens. That's where the pressure, that's one example, and there are many other examples like that. So we already have one country, the country of Peru, that has begun to use endTB2. They essentially already had that regimen in their guidelines. They had a 4-drug regimen with a 5th drug sort of to be decided by the expert committee. And they chose pyrazinamide as the 5th drug to complete the endTB regimen. And that regimen has now been already started in, I believe it's like 8 adults and one 9-year-old. Peru has not typically moved particularly quickly. My colleagues from Peru can support that statement. in adopting innovation. They don't have to wait. I was speaking to colleagues from another country, which I won't name yet because they haven't made a decision, but they're using a 20-month version of endTB2. And they're saying, can we shorten it? Probably. So I think there are ways to move forward. In some countries, maybe it will need to be done under operational research conditions. I don't think that's a recommendation that we as the endTB trial team would make. I think there's enough evidence from the trial and from how regimens have been being composed over the last several years to say that we probably don't need operational research on using the regimens as they are. Maybe on some of these alternatives that we're talking about, on trying to identify optimal populations for the choice of regimen, possibly. Discrete choice experiment, I think there are lots of tools out there that could be used to try to understand better patient preferences, but you're right, we're going to need to know what the differences are. And again, if the only difference is duration, but everything else is equal, people would most likely go with the duration. We know that with the 4-month regimen for drug-susceptible TB, the pill burden has turned out to be a huge issue despite 4 months. That's not going to be a big difference between the BPAL-M and a couple of the endTB regimens. The pill burden is very similar. But I think we don't know until we do a better job of asking people what they prefer. You were very clear that you would want a shorter regimen, and I respect that.
Sometimes I agree with your point that sometimes if we take it to the scale up, then if we lay out the regime on a greater number of mass, not only for the trial people, but also greater number of mass, then we can have a greater output, greater feedback generated from that output. So if this thing is rolled out in any country before the WHO guideline incorporated this is guideline that is not non-binding one. So then we can have a greater idea what is the next step of the research in TB trials can go. What is the direction of next research setup title? What will be that will be set up then?
And I'm just sorry to interrupt. I'm afraid I have to pick a train, so it was great for me to finish the Union conference with the committee session. I'm so glad. Thanks for inviting me. And hello and goodbye to a lot of people in the room I haven't seen enough this week, so thanks. And enjoy the end of the
Thank you very much, Christophe. There's no more sessions after us, so if you have more questions, we can go a little bit. Yeah, I see some hands. Yeah, we have 2 or 3 people in the room.
Thank you. I want to take this time to thank the panelists for sharing such, meaningful, information and, with us. My question is, it's an advocacy thing. Now we have so many options to build, with all regimen for our patients in a way that will be less harmful in comparison to some of those mean injectables. They were good guys anyway because they killed the bugs, but they killed things as well. They weren't supposed to kill in people's body, their kidney, their urine and things like that. So now, what is our responsibility as it pertains to get countries to completely drop all kind of injectables? Because I think it is a human-wide kind of, issue, because we all have the responsibility to do no harm. Now, for having all those options, I would be curious to hear your perspective in terms of making it mandatory for countries to drop all kind of injectables with no conditions, actually. I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, I'm just. We have two more questions, I think.
I think there are lots of people in this room who could contribute to that. Does anybody want to respond? No takers. Okay.
Okay. I should again, I think, declare that I work with MSF, but I'm not from endTB trial, but from Access Campaign. And I work a lot with community, different groups, different marginalized community. To me, I think somewhere I identify more as community rather than MSF. Sorry for that. But to me, the whole news that we have multiple options seems like a very good news, rather than going for something and you have it, and then sometimes you have success and sometimes you have to drop out because of side effects and all of it. The fact that we have multiple regimens, all oral, seems like a very good news to me. And as community, I think, yeah, there's a lot that we need to understand and that we need to see. And yeah, I heard Lindsay saying it would be good to understand like what are the comorbidities which kind of play a role in deciding which regimen to pick up. But then just to have that multiple options in the treatment cascade seems like a very good option to me. So yeah, I think thank you so much for doing that work. And especially coming from India, I think, yeah, we are still looking forward to the whole regimen or the trial which works better for FQ resistance population, because we have 36% FQ resistance among MDR population. So yeah, thank you so much for the good work. And I really think that, yeah, this is a time for us to celebrate and push for larger implementation on the ground, which always takes time.
So I think, Maxo, that partially addressed your question. I think that's one voice saying, yes, we need to move forward. And you're very familiar with the 146 by 24 campaign, which I think has done an incredible job of trying to bring together the new innovations and trying to find the leverage for those new innovations to be implemented and to try to make it uncomfortable for duty bearers to not bring those new innovations. And I think if we could add the endTB regimens to that package of things that people need to feel responsible for making available to the citizens of their country, to the residents of their country as a human right, and to eliminate the injectable, except in the most extreme cases, I agree with you. It's totally time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It's a comment in Carol's show. No, I think it was very interesting in the parallel session. Was probably finished just a few minutes ago. There was a presentation of survey, I think conducted by the WHO on probably for the target regimen profiles, looking at patient preferences in regimens. And it's really interesting because, of course, the first approach was to define the best regimen, and so most people would say we want safe, short regimen without a lot of pills. So it's not surprising. But then when it comes to defining actually the priorities, there are some surprising findings. Like, for example, you see that safety all of a sudden becomes prominent compared to treatment duration, pill burden, and this is not something which is a priority in TB research and clinical research, maybe because it's more complicated, but we see this is not the focus. So I think probably this is very different from each individual, but that's a good reason to start thinking about giving multiple options, giving more weight to the patient preference. And I think it was actually one of the points they would like to be consulted more in the choice of the regimen. I think so. Maybe we should move away from this preferred regimen, which is one option only, and rather to have different options, and some may be preferable for most people, but maybe for others things could be different. And maybe just comment. If you know someone at the union, I would suggest that you send an email, maybe, or if you know someone at the board, because I think it's a little bit of a shame that the Community Connect session is held here, and that the Community Connect session is only for registered persons. So I think this year really, yeah, this is really problematic. So if you know someone, please advocate.
Yeah, we'll let them know. Yeah, definitely. Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about 146 to pick up on that. And certainly the 6 isn't meant to be exclusionary of a good 9. You know, we already have a footnote to the 1, you know, not just 1 HP, but also 3 HP. So the point really is not 146 literally, you know, one size fits all, but that the best science should be available to people when they need it, wherever they are. And so I think we should just, within that campaign, you know, be flexible and make sure that we're keeping up with evidence as it's generated.
Okay, thank you everyone. I think there is no more questions. And thank you for endTB trial team for all your efforts. And thank you for your presence, for sharing your results with us, with the community.
And also, this session has been recorded for the video on demand, so if you want to revisit it, it will be available. Thank you to the speakers.